Hello, this is the Green Report, Rappler's podcast on the environment and climate change. I'm Ia Gozum, social media producer for Rappler, and this is G. Geronimo, our environment editor. Hi, G.
Oh, hi.
So, we want to welcome 2023 with hope. So, we thought it fitting to talk about how movements are built and how people unite around a single cause. Diba, G? Medyo sawa na ba tayo sa
Napaka-hopeful.
mga bad news?
Grabe, gusto
Hopeful
ko yung
na.
optimism and hope ni Iya for this coming year. Gano'n talaga kapag mga marami pang energy.
Grabe. Siyempre for a year starter, 'di ba? Dahil
Yeah.
alam naman natin, buong taon na naman nating, haharapin yung mga masasamang balita and, forecasts on
Mhm.
climate change. So joining us today is Joshua Villalobos, founder of Youth for Climate Hope, a coalition of youth organizations and individuals based in Negros Occidental, leading climate action. Hi, Joshua. How are you?
Hello, Miss
Hi,
Iya,
Kamusta?
Miss G, good
Joshua.
afternoon. Ay,
Hello.
magandang araw, no, sa lahat.
Yes. So to get us started, why don't you tell us how you first got involved in climate action? Ano yung nag-inspire sa'yo na sumama sa ganitong cause?
So una, no, bago ako magsimula, gusto ko munang magpasalamat sa opportunity na ito, no. Alam naman nating, ako fan ako ng Rappler personally. Aba, sumipsip pa.
Oo.
Pero, fan talaga
Thank
ako
you
ng
so
Rappler
much.
and all the, yeah, and all the things you guys are fighting for. Um,
Mm,
so going back to the question, way back in 2015, I mean 2018, I participated in a program called Negros Young Environmentalist Summit. So
mm,
basically, a group of 30 young environmentalists were brought to different cities and municipalities in Negros Occidental to witness environmental programs of different
mm,
cities and municipalities. So I know this is cliche because I've repeated it in different avenues and fora, but I've had a Ninoy Aquino moment during that time, and parang told myself na, this place is worth fighting for.
mm,
This place is worth protecting for. And so after that summit, I messaged the organizers and said that how can I contribute to what you guys are doing, and how can I join different campaigns. So initially, I was involved in anti-plastic campaign in Bacolod because there was a an ordinance before that was passed way back in 2011, but until 2018 and until now, unfortunately, it's not being implemented. Despite, of course, of all the um, not very well statistics on garbage and plastic pollution. So sinasabi namin noon na, hindi na nga ito yung
mm.
perfect time to act, because the perfect time to act on plastics and climate was, 20 years, 30 years ago. And
Yeah.
at this point, we're already gasping our last straws, to save whatever we can. So, and after that, so it was, I think, a year of campaign. We were able to successfully amend the ordinance because we saw loopholes na baka ito yung mga problema kaya hindi tayo nakaka-implement ng mabuti. So, and then after a year, we heard the news, no, of a corporation. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention it. Am I allowed to mention it?
Sige lang, sige lang.
Okay, because I know so there's a corporation who is planning to put up a coal-fired power plant in our province, which is the called the renewable energy capital of the
Mhm,
Philippines. Not officially, but it is referred to by different groups, organizations, and even government agencies as the renewable energy capital of the Philippines. And for a time, I think that was in 2015, it was the solar capital of Southeast Asia because
mm,
it is hosting the biggest solar plant way back until I think one in bigger in Japan or China was built.
mm.
So that's my beginning, and then coal and climate are very very much related. So that was my entry point to climate and anti-fossil fuel campaign.
I think it's amazing, no, na sabi mo nga since 2018 pa at such a young age na wait, ilang taon ka na ba nung 2018?
I was 15 years old
At
back then when I
15,
started.
15 pa
Yes.
lang na, na-grasp mo na kung gaano kalaking, problema yung yung climate change at yung mga nangyayari sa paligid mo na kailangan protektahan ninyo yung community niyo. Grabe 'no, 15. Miss G,
Mhm.
anong ganap natin nung tayo
Anong ginagawa natin nung 15 years old tayo?
meron ba
Pero
tayong
ano
ganap
'to, Joshua, parang you just went to that summit and dun ka lang ba talaga na mulat or, ever since pa talaga you've always been passionate about the environment and all those things?
Mm. I think I've always been passionate about the public stuff, the public issues, because I think I remembered filling out that application to that program because there was a question now, what do you think is the biggest environmental problem in the Philippines? And during that time, it was the time
Mhm,
when the commission and appointments rejected Gina Lopez. And they answered na
yeah.
this is basically the same system that rejected Gina Lopez is the biggest threat to Philippine environment, when politicians have control over our resources and genuine and passionate people are not being appointed to the right positions, then that is the biggest problem, because you cannot just point to mining, you cannot just point to fossil fuels. Basically, it's a bigger political and social system that actually perpetuates these environmental problems that we have right now. So I think even before that program, I've always been interested about, public life, social
mhm.
issues. But that was I would call that my baptism of fire, that program to that actually welcomed me into the work that I'm doing right now.
Mhm. Ang ganda kasi sinabi mo kung na yung sistema yung kailangan nating baguhin and not just particular issues. But your group is called Youth for Climate Hope. Pero year on year,
Mhm.
climate forecasts are getting grimmer. Mas parang mas
Yeah.
nagiging
Mhm.
apocalyptic yung mga sinasabi nilang mga forecasts, no? So is there really a reason for hope or is there really a reason for us to hope, especially since this issue is really going to affect the younger generations?
Mhm. Napakagandang tanong, no, and we're always being asked that question. How do you actually stay hopeful in this moment where all reports actually point to the same direction? It's the doom and gloom scenario, basically. So I think um that's basically the reason why we named ourselves Youth for Climate Hope. It was in 2018 when we started. IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, just released a report saying or showing the impacts of heating of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and also 2 degrees Celsius. So for us during that time, being hopeful is courageous enough. No, it's being courageous enough just to hope in this doom and gloom scenarios, and even all of the climate predictions are pointing us to broken systems. But um, I think there's no option, there's no other option but to hope, because I
Mm.
strongly believe that if we end hoping or if we stop hoping, will be anong tawag doon, paralyzed by fear, paralyzed by burnout, and paralyzed by any other things, that can do that. So if we don't hope, as I always say, and I think I've said it in one forum before, um, the only alternative to hope is death and despair. So would we rather choose death and despair in this scenario, or we would have the courage to hope? So maybe they would say not to hope in this era is crazy or
Mhm.
insanity,
Yeah,
but
it is.
really, really necessary. And some people needs to be insane to
Yeah,
change the
that's
world,
that's
maybe
true.
not to that extent.
That's
Wow,
true.
yun na yung quote of the day natin, ano?
Yeah, that's the headline. Maybe we need to be a little bit crazy nga
Insane.
to hope.
Yes.
Ayun, so siguro to give our listeners a bit of context, bakit ikaw yung na-invite namin to talk about hope and to talk about movement building. Baka pwede mo sa amin ikwento yung naging success nyo in warding off mining interest in Negros. Actually, feeling ko yung mga advocates and listeners ng ganitong stories in general, uhaw yan sila sa victory stories ng
Mhm.
mga about the environment. Kasi a lot of the headlines and a lot of stories just about losing and losing. So, can you tell us
Mhm.
more about your story?
Yes. Thank you, no, and it's really an honor to tell our story in this kind of platform. But just Negros and our campaign was focused on anti-fossil fuel, particularly anti-coal, not mining. So, um, as I mentioned earlier, it was 2018 when a corporation is proposing to put up a coal-fired power plant, and we say, the disrespect to put up a coal-fired power plant, the dirtiest type of fossil fuel in a renewable energy capital of a country. Um, so there were we put that's why we organized Youth for Climate Hope to be a coalition of young people that will campaign and victoriously won, no, and was able to convince the governor to declare the province of Negros Occidental a coal-free province, because our neighbor Negros Oriental had an earlier ordinance, or I think it was also an executive order, to declare their province a coal-free province. So they banned coal-fired power plant in their province, and so I think that's also the reason why the that certain corporation went to Negros Occidental, because they can put
Mhm.
up in hours. So that was a series of weekly protests. I think it was almost the same time when Greta Thunberg was also protesting outside the capital. So,
Oh, okay.
on our end, I said the Swedish parliament, on our end in the provincial capital, I think there's only around 10 to 15 people. And it ended in a 2,000 strong mobilization of youth and
Mhm.
students that actually forced the provincial government to declare Negros Occidental as a coal-free province. But I
Mhm.
think the more inspiring part of it is the reality that Negros Occidental and its people has been um, ang tawag dito, has been resisting coal-fired power plants as early as 1996. There has been six attempts of different coal companies and corporations to establish a plant in Baco, in Negros Occidental, but none of them was successful because of the strong resistance of our people. So I think, there was a narrative before, I think around 2019, when Greta said that our adults have failed us. But in our case in Negros Occidental, we cannot say that that's the case, because our adults, the generation that came before us, actually fought hard, to keep off coal-fired power plants and fossil fuel companies from Negros Occidental. And on our fight in 2018, it felt like not only a responsibility for our generation and the generation that will still come, but it felt like a responsibility also to the campaigns and the victories they had, no, of the past generation. So baka sabihin nila, ano ba yan, nung kami hindi kami natalo, ngayon kayo natalo pa kayo. So
Pressure, pressure.
yes, there's a pressure. But I think on a lighter note, the campaign, even though the youth was at the forefront, it was a intergenerational,
Yeah.
uh, big sectoral campaign, because there's really a huge support and backing of the
Mhm.
church. No, Bishop Jerry Alminasa was one of the leading figures, and one of the strongest, I think, blow to that campaign was when the four bishops of Negros Island supported the campaign. So that really got a
Mhm.
boost, in the faithful and in the Catholic Church. And many of the young people who mobilized, even though myself personally, I'm not a Catholic and I'm not religious, but most of the students who mobilized are from Catholic schools. So,
Uh-huh.
there's really a strong connection with that. And we must acknowledge the support of different sectors, and different workers groups also supported us. So I think that's uh, I not to brag, no, modesty aside, but I think people can always look at how Negros did it and can
Mhm.
also do it on their end. I attended the one forum in about renewable energy, and one of the speakers from Mindanao said that they're very jealous of Negros, because Negros was able to keep its coal-free status up until the end, no, with 2020, with 20 years of struggle. And so yeah, that's it. I think that's a short history, a brief history of our campaign in Negros Occidental.
Pero tama yung sinabi mo 'no. I think there's a lot to be said about how yung kabataan yung magmamana ng struggle na 'to, kailangan kayo na yung nasa frontlines, kailangan ka na yung mag-lead and I think we're seeing that, but also it is important na importanteng alalahanin na struggles are intergenerational. Hindi pwedeng kabataan lang. And hindi pwedeng
Mm-hmm.
isang sector lang. It's intergenerational, it's multi-sectoral. So, it's really a question about how you're going to unite all these different people and different sectors into into a single cause. Siguro, question aside, no? And I think a lot of our listeners are curious. Where do you draw the courage to go up against huge conglomerates? How do you deal with intimidation and knowing that these institutions, uh, they have more power than you and they have more
Mm-hmm.
leverage, in this struggle.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a very difficult question, and I'll try to answer it. But honestly, I think this is a genuine and ang tawag doon, parang fresh, hindi filtered na response. When you have a strong community with you, community of young activists, community of not so young activists, but joining young activists, I
Seasoned
think that will,
activists.
yeah, actually that's the right term, the seasoned activist. I think that will give you the courage that you need. And you can always, when you feel down, you can always draw inspiration, courage from them. It's a
Mhm.
give and take relationship, I think. And it's very important that movements foster good relationships among each other, and they build community, more than being ang tawag dito, partners or alliances. I think it should be comradeship and that spirit of brotherhood and sisterhood or whatever. Anong tawag doon? Basta I think kailangan it goes beyond na parang work lang siya. It's just a struggle that you need to win. But you also need to realize that they're also people, no? At kami ay tao din. So kailangan i-foster yung ano man yung kailangan para mas strengthen, no, at hindi masira yung campaign. So napakahalaga ng pagtatag ng malakas at empowering, enabling community where I think young people are given spaces, because I think that's also one of the advantages that we had before, because not only we were listened to. I think we were actively asked, no, by seasoned activists, what do you think is the right thing to do? What are your insights on this, or what are your thoughts? I think it's a very very important um, approach in dealing with young people, not only with young people but every other neglected sectors, no, and sectors who are not always on the front line, or sectors who are not always given spaces in these progressive movements.
So yung mga kabataan talaga in recent years, they have been on the front lines of the biggest environmental causes, hindi lang climate change, but most prominently climate change. For you, what draws young people to this advocacy of the environment? And then for organizations like Youth for Climate Hope, how do you engage these young people? Of course, you also are you're young yourself. So papaano ano yung mga ginagawa niyo to really engage the young people and to keep them fighting and to not lose hope in this fight?
Mhm. I think, no, isa sa mga rason kung bakit napakaraming mga kabataan are drawn to environmental causes, because there is a realization that it's actually our generation who will suffer the brunt, no, of whatever we're doing today. The carbon emissions, the carbon dioxide and the greenhouse gas that we're emitting to the atmosphere. It's our generation that will suffer yung mga baha, um, extreme weather events, and all climate impacts that we know. So I think that's really a strong motivator. And I'm currently studying sociology at Silliman, and I'm doing my research, also focusing on climate activists. One of the literature, even though it's from the UK, but I think being part of the movement also is applicable to the Philippines, na sabi merong three major motivations yung mga young people why they join the climate movement. And I think it's also applicable even outside the climate movement, but environmental causes. Yung isa ay fear, yung isa ay anger, but yung isang balancing factor to fear and anger is hope. So una, fear dahil yung mga kabataan ay natatakot no to the uncertainty that actually awaits us in the future, no? So ano ba yung klaseng mundo yung mamanahin namin? Ano ba yung klaseng mundo yung lalakihan namin? What kind of future do we actually have, or do we even have a future? That's the bigger question. And then number two, anger. Because alam naman natin no na alam na natin kung ano yung dapat gawin but hindi siya ginagawa. So nakakagalit yon bilang mga kabataan, and not only kabataan but I think all citizens are have that justified anger na alam naman natin na dapat pinoprotektahan yung mga karagatan pero bakit hindi ginagawa? Alam natin na masama yung sobra-sobrang pagmimina pero bakit hindi nire-regulate? Yung mabuting DNR secretary na ayos sa pagmimina, tinatanggal pa. So, that forms a lot of anger. But an important part of the formula is, that balancing hope. Because young people actually gets paralyzed when they don't have hope. You know, it's common sense na kapag galit ka, sobrang takot mo, hindi mo na alam yung gagawin. So I think hope, even though I mentioned earlier that is for the insane people to hope in this kind of era, but it also kind of makes us sane, makes us it balances out na yung nakakatakot na part, yung nakakagalit na part ay binabalanse ng yung magandang part, no? Yung meron pa actually tayong kayang gawin kahit nandito na tayo sa climate deadline. Um, Tapos, napakahalaga, and this is an active choice that Youth for Climate Hope is pursuing when we started it, na gawin talaga siyang very safe space, for young people to actually not be intimidated because sinasabi nga na ang usually kalaban ng big environmental movements ay also big multi-billion dollar companies, corporations, and conglomerates. So, kailangang gumawa no ng environment within the movement na kahit nakakatakot dahil napakalaki ng kalaban, at in Pilipinas ay number one in 3 consecutive years sa Asia na deadliest country for land and human rights defenders ayon sa Global Witness. Napakahalaga na mag-foster ng hindi intimidating na space, no? At of course there's also realizations na kailangan nating maging mindful din na totoo naman ding nangyayari yon na pinagpapatay yung isang coal activist, ang pinakaunang pinaslang no sa administrasyon ni dating presidente Duterte no sa Bataan. Siya yung naging unang human rights violation victim. So that's really a reality that we need to deal with. But so as I mentioned, it should organization should make that active choice, to make spaces non-intimidating, especially for beginners. Um, yung nagsisimula kami, I think it's an experience na madali talagang mag-engganyo ng mga kabataan sa mga hindi nakakakabang masyadong mga campaigns. So, halimbawa, yung anti-plastic campaign kasi may
Yeah.
pa-clean up drive, may pa-forum, may pa-lobbying with politicians. But unlike actually going against a multi-billion project, so medyo hindi na
Yeah.
yun fun and exciting. But of course, for activists, it's also fun and exciting. Pero for other young people na medyo baguhan or medyo nag-explore pa lang ng kanilang space sa campaign and movement, kailangan gumawa talaga at maging, I think, no talaga yon sa campaigners and movement builders around the country na they should make an active choice of making a space for young people where they can,
Yeah.
grow and also learn how they can contribute to these campaigns.
Actually, sabi nga nila, it's not about how you start. Kung sa anti-plastic campaign ka nag-start, kung sa beach cleanup ka na-organize, kung sa church ka
Agree.
na-organize, it's not how you start. It's how you and the campaigners, kung paano isusustain, no? Kung paano ka aakit dun sa level na, ay, kaya mo na palang sumama sa mga ganong malalaking kampanya against huge projects in your communities, mga ganun, di ba?
And I think it really also helps na alam ng mga kabataan, or even actually hindi lang to kabataan nga, but groups in general, na hindi sila nag-iisa, na hindi sila just one group going against this big interests, but that ang daming at stake at ang daming communities who are willing to fight kung given the yun nga the platform and given really the opportunity to do so. And ang ganda nung sinabi mo na wag ma-intimidate, na hindi dapat yung safe yung maging spaces for the young people. Pero ano ba, Joshua, ano ba yung mood ng mga kabataan na sumasama ngayon sa mga laban or sa mga climate and these advocacies on the environment? Ano bang um, feelings nila about all these issues that are happening around us?
I think marami sa amin yung galit, no, sa actions and inactions that we're actually seeing not only at our communities but actually on the bigger global scale. Kasi alam naman natin na this battle will not be won or failed by the Philippines, because actually we're a small emitting country. Hindi naman ganoon kalaki yung ating emissions. And historically, wala naman tayong malaking emissions. So,
Mhm.
I think we're angered, no, na ano ba yan, taon-taon na lang. I always follow Rappler's report on COP, no, kasi binabantayan ko, medyo extensive yung reporting ninyo at medyo updated, nagpapasip-sip na naman. Pero personally, for 2 years now, since COP26 in Glasgow and 27 sa Sharm el Sheikh sa Egypt, sinusundan ko, no, yung report ng Rappler kung ano na yung yan nangyayari. And I think the new COP is actually offering another angering reality, na the head of the negotiations is actually a president, a CEO of a oil and gas company. But going back to the question, yung so there's that anger, no, and there's actually a growing climate anxiety among youth advocates. I think in many cases that has been documented, especially that occurs, no, kapag meron malalaking mga international issues na nag-a-arise about climate. Halimbawa, yung nangyayari sa Germany, it's taking backwards, and sabi nga ni Greta Thunberg, Germany is embarrassing itself with um, the expansion of that coal mine. But I think the very reality, the very fact that they are still with this campaign, even though parang wala nang victory ito. Isang question nga palagi sa mga activists at campaigners, what does victory actually look like in our work, no? Ano ba talaga yung victory na ini-imagine natin in the future? How do we actually, kasi yung sabi nila, kailangan mong imaginein muna yung victory bago mo malaman kung paano mo siya i-achieve. So, I think the very fact that we're still thinking of victory in the future, that we're still thinking that things can still be done despite the very the window of opportunity to do it is closing and slimming fastly. I think it shows a strong courage to hope, no? Or in the words of Barack Obama, it's the audacity to hope in this
Yeah.
moment. So I think young people still has that audacity to hope na kahit ito na yung mga nangyayari, ito na yung mga realities, these are the reports, these are the data, uh, this is the BS that's happening in COP, we're still hoping and we're still very engaged in the conversation and willing to take action for the climate.
That's a very heavy question, no? Actually, kahit beyond climate activists in general, parang what does
Yeah.
victory look like? Kasi these causes, yung itsura ng victory for these causes, is very, very, very different from the status quo, and it's very hard to imagine. So I think more than beyond hope, beyond anger and fear, yung isa pang emotion ba ang tawag dun? Hindi siya emotion. Pero isa pang, aspeto na i-a-attribute natin sa kabataan ngayon ay for having this very, very huge, imagination. Kasi, you need that huge kind of imagination to hope for a better future, to hope for a better world, and to think na yung mundo na gagalawan mo 10, 20 years from now will be better than the one we're living now.
And importante din talaga na we celebrate the small wins. Gano man sila ka-few and far in between. Kapag meron tayong mga
True.
naipanalong
True.
laban, kailangan natin talagang ano yun, kaya yun din yung mga, we're also in the lookout for those kinds of stories din. Kasi sabi mo nga, di ba Joshua, na kailangan din natin talagang balansehin yung doom and gloom with ano ba yung possibilities? Kasi hindi naman, we're all working towards that. Ayaw naman, wala namang may gusto na, di ba, we just surrender to our fate helplessly. Yun yung gusto natin,
Mm,
yun yung the last thing that we really want to happen, na talagang yung helplessness na dahil nga sobrang parang feeling natin wala nang mangyayari. But young people like you really show us na talagang we can do something in our own little way. So my last question is,
yeah. If
sige, go.
Miss G, if I may answer to that because it's a very good yung pinoint out mong celebrating small victories. Because I think that's also one of the things that helped us sustain our campaign in Negros because we tried to celebrate our small victories. Because yung victory na pinakahinahangad mo at the end ay malayo pa. So kailangan mo mag-celebrate ng small victories that will actually sustain you and your comrades in the campaign before you reach that big victory. And that helps us in energizing us again and making
Building
us imagine again.
morale.
Yeah, building morale and um, ibalik tayo, no? I-refocus tayo na ito yung gusto nating gawin. So, we're actually in the right direction. So, napakagandang pinoint out yung celebrating small victories and it's very important that movements actually celebrate those kinds of victories.
Mm-hmm. Actually, ang sasabihin ko nga doon sa sinabi ni Ian na aside from fear, hope, and anger, diba sabi mo imagination, Iya? Actually, young
Yeah.
people have all the energy in the world. I think that's really important. Na meron kang energy to pursue all these things. Kasi kung wala kang energy, diba, parang hindi mo to masusustain talaga. So you energize one another, the groups energize one another, the young people energize one another. So to that point, kung there are young people listening right now, and I'm sure there are, and they want to be more active in the cause, in environmental and climate causes, for you, Joshua, where's the best place for them to start?
I think the best place for to start, no, among young climate activists, or even if you're not an activist yet but you consider that you have a deep concern for the environment, it's to have the courage or the audacity to hope. Sometimes it takes to go within yourself first, na kailangan mong mangarap muna or magkaroon ng what's hope in Tagalog? Pag-asa, magkaroon ng
Pag-asa.
pag-asa na meron pa actually tayong kayang gawin. And as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of communities, there are a lot of groups and movements around the Philippines that you can actually join. There are online spaces where you can start to just read each other's thoughts and ideas, where you can actually connect with people. So, kailangan mo lang hanapin yung tribo mo at mahalin mo sila, no? Find your tribe and love them. I think I've mentioned that
That's
earlier.
nice.
Pero when you find that community, but I think there's still places na walang ganyan. So, it only takes for you 2 people, 3 people to start a small community, and this might not come as a news flash, pero it has been said na hindi naman kailangan na yung ginagawa natin ay palaging malalaki. It should not be always going against corporations. It should not always be going against politicians. It should not always be about big laws, big ordinances, or big um, legislations. It can be wherever we can, no? Sabi nga ni Miss Iya kanina, it's starting where you can, no? Kung yun yung kaya mong gawin ngayon, yan yung
Yeah.
gawin mo. Personally, I started with just an active choice of not using plastic straws. So, and that was, I think, 5 years ago. And personally, I still make mistakes. There are still moments that I use straws, or the attendant at the restaurant would put a straw in my drink. So, you know, um, this being in this type of space, it's not always linear, it's not always going up or being better. It's also encountering mistakes and failures as campaigners and activists, but have the courage to hope and to start somewhere, because the country is plagued with different environmental issues and problems, from plastic pollution, air pollution, lack of access to water, deforestation, mining, fossil fuel. There's actually there's a report done by an NGO called Center for Energy Ecology and Development that the
Mhm.
country is actually rerouting because President Duterte declared a coal moratorium. So instead of coal expansion, our country is actually um, rerouting or taking another route to gas, which is another form of fossil fuel that is, even though not emitting as much carbon as coal, but it emits a lot of methane, which is also 10 times more potent than carbon dioxide in terms of trapping heat. So that will, make our planet warmer. So there's a lot of problems. Merong isang billionaire na nagsabi, that I don't want to mention his name, but his thoughts actually counts in this conversation. Sabi niya, just choose something you're angry about and work on it. So kapag galit ka sa pang-aabuso sa kalikasan, pang-aabuso sa mga tao, just do something about it.
I think, ano, no, as a final note, as we're talking about hope, uh, parang what makes hope sustainable, ay yung takeaway ko from our conversation is if it's collectively shared. If you, sabi mo nga kanina, kapag nahanap mo yung tribe mo, however small, however big or small yung campaign na ginagalawan mo, when you find your community, when you find these similar-minded people who cares about the environment, who cares about the things that you also care about, doon nabubuo yung pag-asa na sinishare mo sa ibang tao. And in that way, when it's shared, it's more long-lasting, it's more sustainable, and it's what, makes the movement. So with that, thank you Joshua for joining us today. Maraming salamat sa pag-share ng iyong stories at insights. For our listeners, if you'd like to pitch your story about the environment, drop us a message at iagozum or at gheronimo on Twitter. See you next episode.
Bye.
Bye!